Dasha Hao. Today I will take you into a journey about my own experience which I have with a computer and a digital life. I'm an architect, I am an educator, and I work a lot with computation. Now, if we work with computation these days, what do we do first? We ask our friend AI to tell us what to do. So in this TED talk, I said, go to AI and said, TED, AI, what is my talk about? And this is the outcome. And I thought, this is really interesting. It is actually very conventional. On one side, you have the guys. On the other side, you have the girls. You have some trains, some roads, and some buildings. It looks futuristic, but it is very conventional. And I thought that is interesting because we connect AI with the future, with the vision, with the new. But what it is very much a reflection of what reality is. Now, reality 20 years ago, here in that space, in many places in China, looked like this. It was really a new begin, a new houses, new architecture needs to be built. Everything was new, there was a lot of energy. We still have the energy, but now everything is built. So where are we now? Where will we be in the next 20 years? And that is an interesting graph, if you look at that, how the population in China is now changing over the next couple of years. We reach now really the peak of the population. The population gets older, we have more and more old people, we have less and less young people to do things. And that becomes very crucial if we think about what is about with the architecture, what about the spaces which we have, if in the future we don't have the people to really fill these spaces and live in that. Now, that is a very interesting question to answer. Again, we go to AI and we think about AI, can it help us? But if we really think about what is AI and the technology, it is an instrument, but it is not really the answer. So AI helps us to think differently, and that becomes really where we as humans come in. How can we think differently with the computational tool in the solution of the problems which we have around us? Now, I work a lot with virtual reality, and you see here that is the whole spectrum. On one hand, you have the reality. On the other hand, you have the pure virtual side. Very often, we try to simulate the reality in a virtual context. So if we talk about the smart city, the digital twin, this is where we simulate and try to simulate our environment in a digital. But we are real. It is just a simulation. What I'm interested in is this much more of how the virtual can influence reality and how that can enrich our lives where we are and can offer with that something new. Now, if we overlay that with AI, I coined this term of the real AI, that is our human brain, this is our own intelligent, and there is a virtual one, which is the computational one. Now, that is a building which really reflects of how a virtual can inform reality. All what it is, it's a cloud. I don't need anything else to describe that to you. With the term cloud, you all have an idea. You know plan, section, elevation. You know how it would work, how a cloud would work. So it's a virtual idea which informs reality and which informs what a building can be. Now, similar like that is this art installation which was done in the late 60s. It's a paradise. You're stepping out of a building into a different realm. It is sort of a kind of a palm tree beach situation, but from the outside, you be very visible. So are you now inside the building, outside of the building? And that forms a very new ambiguity, which is sort of the virtual imposed in a real context. Degas, a French philosopher, long time ago in the 16th century, he coined the term of dualism. Dualism is how the mind and the body works together. So for example, you want to go on a diet, so you decide, I'm not eating anymore. After some time, your stomach starts to grumble and said, okay, I will eat. So there is this relationship between your body and the mind. Now, if we translate that into our environment of what we do, we have imagination, what we want to do, we use computation environment, and there has to be an interaction of what we want to do, what the computer can do, and how that can informs and can become reality. We humans are very good in using these different tools and misusing it. So as a designer, you use photography, and you see here different ways of how photography is used, not the camera in the way of how you're supposed to use it. You keep the shutter open, you use a torch, and you make some movement, and you get the light. So this picture here with the person here with the light, while he does it in reality, you don't see the sketch or this movement. You see it only with the photography, so it is a translation of how that virtual idea becomes reality by using technology. Very often we talk about the Internet of Things and we talk about the smart city. But I think that is a very technical term where we just look at the technology. We have to think more spatially where we are and bring the human into the equation. So that's why I talk about the Internet of Spaces, because in the space, that is where we are, and we interact in a space, and we think about, and there can be technology around us, but it is how we interact in this context. And the same thing with the smart city. It is not only that there is sketches and computer to calculate or simulate things, it is also of how we interpret the data and how we are part in this equation and play a role in that. And that is a very different thinking, because it goes to the next level, a higher level of thinking, where we include the human being. Now, we human beings are fantastic in setting up very simple rules, which then generate something very fascinating. Everybody loves to go to a market. But if we think about what a market is basically everybody gets the same footprint, pays some money to the community, and then you put your market stall there and you sell your things. And you see here the market in Hong Kong. That is really fascinating, this market. It's really interesting. Now, if we think as an architect, we want to generate a market like this, what comes first? The architecture and the leftover is the market? Or do we have the market, what we do, what kind of architecture, what kind of environment do we need to sustain such an interesting environment? If we think this way around, then we can actually not just do things with leftover spaces, which we then try to fill with some meaning, but we actually can generate meaningful spaces. Here you see of how I work with my students. We use now the computational in an environment where we use the real and the physical with the virtual and combine this together. But what you see in this, it is not only the technology, there's always a discussion around with others and the social interaction. And interestingly here in this picture is where the person in VR want to reach something much higher, and to get there, well, in the computation you can zoom and fly up there, but using a chair to go up there, the physical brings it back to the reality, and you can understand of how that sits in a real context. You see how people now interact and discuss this while they're at the same time in a virtual context. And it goes more into it, and you see of how we can then develop different environments. Here, this is sort of a simulation of what people see in a virtual environment. And we can now do all that, a digital twin, and we can test of how things behave, how the environment behaves. We can see of how flooding, rainwater happens. We can explore earthquakes and so on. This is very fascinating. But what it doesn't show is how the people actually react and how the people actually feel in that. We can put people and reactors in there, but we have to see of how that goes back to our real environment. So what we did is we used eye tracking, and we looked at an environment, and we tested where people are actually looking in an environment. And if you now understand you have that space, what do I see here? What do I see, and where do I look longer? I can understand the environment and how people use the environment much more. So we can think about building regulations not in terms of how tall a building is, how wide, what color. We can look at that and see how does a building actually fits in a larger context, where do people look at it, and does it match visually and bring an overall aesthetic? You see here, this is just a different aspect to it of how people use a very busy environment. Now looking at that, we thought, oh, that is interesting. If we now can test of how people look, where they look at, can we use our eyes not only to see things, but also to generate things? And in this video, what you see here is by focusing on at a certain spot, you generate a form, or you focus longer, you can subtract, you can erase certain parts of the form. And that is a very different interaction with your senses. So your sense, your eye, which is normally only one way, I can see, you suddenly generate things. Now imagine you use your ear and you not only hear things, but you could actually generate music at the same time. So you generate something, you hear something. And that is this experiment. Now, that allows us a different interaction also with our own body of how we perceive the environment, because we use our senses not only in a single thing and just consume things, we become active player, we become creator in this context. This is how we showed architecture and complex environment in 20 years ago. It is a plan, and I don't want to be the construction person to make sense out of it and build something. So it was very complicated. It was the data was accurate, but it was not in a way that we can use it. So what we went as architect, we went to the airline industry and used software from the airline industry to visualize it more three-dimensional, and by that suddenly the same plan, what you saw earlier, makes sense, and it becomes interesting, and I can understand of how it is built. Now, this is then how we build buildings, and we make it very complicated and do things. And if you look at this facade, there is each panel has its different shape, its different form, and so on. Now, this is fantastic architecture. We want that, but think about of how that is produced. So every panel is different. So how can we manage this one? So as a designer, you not only design the building and you bring that to a construction, but you also have to design the machine which builds the building. So this machine forms these panels, puts the holes in it, and it can be adjusted to match each individual of this panel. In that way, you can produce a very complex building. But that is interesting, because now, if we think about the machine produced as part of the building, we use now AI to generate certain parts of the building and parts in here. You see here a lot of complex joints, and to produce them each individually as a human, to design that and make that is a lot of work and it's very tedious. So an AI helps us to forming and automating this process. The next step is that we use AI to generate a code which then AI can produce the form out of it. So it is the next level where AI becomes automatic, and as human, we be clear about the design intent, we define where we want to go, and in this way we can then explore the things. Humans are fantastic in understanding things their own way. So this building was planned in a certain way, and then another pipe has to come. Well, what do? We just pump it through the window. That is great. This is creative. This is what we want to have. It is not just a planned building, but it is individualized. Or this one, in an airport building, you see all the ribs and the pipes, and for the pipes there were holes, but the last one forgot the holes. So the whole pipes cannot be put nicely where it was supposed to be. And the person then changed it and put just the pipe underneath, because that makes sense. But that's an interesting. So we designed this environment, perfectly with the computer. Something gets lost in translation, and we find a solution which is then actually also very good in aesthetic matching. Going into a virtual environment, that is a virtual environment where we not try to mimic a reality, but we generate an environment which is true for a virtual expression. You see certain forms and aspects of it and colors, but they don't have a representation in terms of reality. They become their own thing in their own experience. And to make that experience even stronger, while the person has a headset underneath, there are actors outside of this environment to interact with the person in the VR. So the person in VR sees certain objects coming to him, and the person can interact with that, touch it, feel it, there's sound to it, and suddenly there is an interaction within an environment which seems to be stable, but it is a personal experience. And it turns around the idea what an actor is doing in the audience, because now the audience is the active participant, and the actor just serves the audience in that experience. Here, this is another sample of it where we have a very large installation, and that installation reacts to the person and the person in the rooms. So what you say, how your emotions are triggered, that triggers a reaction to that element. So your space deforms and transforms itself to become something different. So you see how it talks, how it falls, how it embraces you, or how it repels to you. We went to Kashgar, a city on the western side of China, and the city was under renovation, and a lot of the old heritage was taken down. So we capture the environment, and we put it in a thing not as an authentic capture, but as a living object. So you see, we went there using drones, using photogrammetry, rebuilt this environment, and that environment then is a living environment, like a living city, where people can interact with it and can change it and can amend it, can fix certain things, and can customize it in their own way, like a real city. And that is a very different interaction of keeping an environment not as an archive, but as a living thing, and be able to interact with it. And we use their different technology so that you don't have the headset, but it's much easier to interact with this environment. And as a last one, we all had the idea of a glitch, and where you open an image, and you see here the girl on the one side, you open it, and there's something happens, and you see on the other side the image, which then you see. Now, this is the same computational information. There's nothing wrong, it's just the computer interprets the data in a different way that we as humans can't see it. Now, this is now the same information interpreted by an architect, not to get the actual photo back, but to get an impression of what it could be in terms of an architectural experience. And you see how that develops into something its own. It is not a forensic getting back the original data, but the same data interpreted spatially as an architect and differently, and that is what I'm really interested in. Now, just to wrap up the presentation, you see here how we also explore with a mimic of a kind of nature and kind of a living being. We perceive a form, a shape in a virtual environment, in a digital environment. We bring it out to 3D printing. We put it in different media, here with water or with jelly, and we animate them just with air, and you see that they suddenly become alive without that they are actually existing, but because of that quality and the visual experience, you feel that they are alive, you want to touch them, you want to smell them, you want to interact with these shapes, and they become something really interesting. And that's what I also want to do. I want to generate form and designs which are where we want to interact with, which they become interesting and exciting for us. Let's don't forget the environment in which we are in. Here you see Suzhou over the past 100 years. On one hand, it was the past of how every stripe is what the average temperature of Suzhou, And you see in the past 20 years of how the temperature gets out, it gets really hot and it gets very hotter. We have to think about how we can address the climate change, how we can deal with that, and that architecture, our built environment is part of it, and we want to shape that, and we want to come back to the more blue color rather than the dark red and the black color. Thank you very much.